morning, as the case may be. I think some of you are dialing in from outside Malaysia. Again, welcome, and thank you for joining this webinar. Let me give you a little bit more, something that's a bit more relevant to this talk on DBA. Because of the quality assurance angle in higher education, I naturally have to look at qualifications, different types of qualifications, the outcomes, the structure, the design, the assessment, and that's part of the journey how I became more intimately acquainted with different types of qualification, different designs of qualification. That is part of the quality assurance of higher education. And doctoral qualifications are something that are always important within the higher education setup. And that's part of the background. And secondly, I have been through a DBA program myself, a bit about this later on, which was in a university was among the earlier ones in the country, public university, that had a DBA program at that time. Soon after that, many of them, almost, I think, most of the RUs and public universities have one now, together with many in the private higher education sector. So at that time, it was probably the only one at that time. So there's also going through this process, and the next part is actually I have taught in a DBA program, supervised students in a DBA program, examine DBA thesis and I'm basically sharing what I've learned through this journey from different vantage points with you in this slide. And as you can see, the end of the slide is not going to give you definitive answers to all that has been troubling you, either as a DBA student or as a postgraduate coordinator or as a PhD student or as an academic or supervisor. I don't think one webinar is going to settle this issue, but I hope by the end you'll be able to get some more clarity and hopefully many more questions about the two doctoral qualifications that most business schools offer. Okay, this is what I'll do. Try and address this very quickly. Hopefully we can get into questions. And as you can see, I organize this as questions around which I will talk. And then by the end, you should be able to get an idea what DBA is, and by comparison, what PhD is not. And hopefully, just a quick, some of this is what I've heard in the corridors of business schools when I was doing the part of the accreditation process. When you go there, some of this has been in their brochures, written remarks made to me personally, or something I heard students, DBA students talking among themselves, and also sharing with assessors like this. So these are some of these common things. What is DBA? DBA is just PhD with coursework. These are popular conceptions or perceptions among different people involved in DBA. Right? Yeah, DBA is one with the dissertation that that does not require the same standard as PhD. So something, less rigorous than PhD. DBA is a doctoral qualification, and it is all about looking for solutions to business problems. And the fourth one, DBA, is for practitioners, and therefore the theory that populates almost all disciplines, including business studies or business management, plays a lesser role. So it is practice-based knowledge and wisdom So academic theories don't play as much a role because this is for practitioners. That's one very, very strong and a prevailing perception among many students, especially those who are from the business side and not from the academia. There are also institutions that in their promotion pitch, they say DBA is actually the easy version of PhD. I suppose in their excitement to promote the program to practitioners. So that comes in. And the last one is DBA, because there's coursework in many of the DBAs and the dissertation component. So the DBA is just MBA, and the dissertation is at the doctoral level. So these are some of these things. I probably might have heard many of these things. And these are all comments that give you insight into the mind of people. I mean, rightly or wrongly, they have come to believe this. And hopefully by the end, we can answer these questions. You can answer these questions, or we can answer these questions together. And some of my observations as an assessor. When I talk to the people who are managing it, the students who are in the program, the supervisors, the lecturers who are teaching in the program, you get this. So DBA is just, what's the difference between DBA and MQ? It's the duration, content, credits, and research. Sorry, some of these are my comments or observations. So they think of DBA in terms of just duration. It's three years. It's got coursework. It's different from PhD because there's a coursework element. Yes, it is one that bears credit because pure research does not, we don't assign any credits. So the volume of work is generally understood and known, but we don't quantify it and describe it in credit terms. And there is a research component. So that's the understanding of DBA by the program coordinators. There is no clear program concept. I mean, they have not thought about what is this thing that they call the DBA, who should it address, what kind of value you should provide, how does it bring the discipline and the practice together, how should you teach SS? No, there's no clear program concept. It's just 80 credits, 3 years, whole bunch of courses, there's a dissertation, and you have a candidate and a supervisor and a program and a calendar that takes you through. No clear program concept. No real clear thinking about pedagogy. How should we teach them? Because there is a taught component. How should we teach them? At the doctoral level, how should we teach them? You have classes? Do you have a seminar? Is it self-learning? And in many cases, everyone who is involved in the program, from the one who's managing to the one who's teaching and the one who's assessing, somehow everybody, this understanding that everybody should know what it is, okay, and what they should do in the class. So there is a great deal of faith that somehow intuitively everybody will understand what to do. The dissertation is just shorter, same structure, same expectations. So there's no different expectations in terms of PhD. So you expect the same from the student. Research that is original, research that deals with an issue that can add to our understanding that previously was unclear, was not clear, and preferably exclusive. I mean, preferably but not exclusively applied. There's an understanding, but this is not really enforced in most DBA. There is an understanding that it should be applied, it should be industrial in nature, it should be practitioner-oriented and things like that. But if you look at the thesis or the dissertation that they do, you do not always get that applied characteristic shining through. And assessment. Right, when you have all kinds of coursework and the assessments, and they seem to be trying this interest in trying to get right answers. Okay, just like at lower levels in higher education, at the diploma degree and things like that, the quest is to get the right answer. and not so much to get the right framework, the right approach, and answers may differ, right? And number 8 is actually a common phenomenon, which is actually extremely troubling. In DBA, they tend to think that you don't need to read as much because these are busy practitioners and they can't allocate as much time, so therefore the reading has to be minimal. So that is also a belief common among the students, and sometimes also reciprocated by lecturers by saying, okay, you don't have to read as much, we'll give you a smaller reading list, we will not demand as much, and things like that. Trying to understand the practitioner's time constraints. Lower expectation by supervisors and examiners. They said, well, this is a DBA student, so you don't expect him to go and validate the questionnaire, go through many steps in validating something. So it's the expectation is lowered. And of course, many course leaders who are new, who are PhD holders, and they're just there to hold the fort, have no clue what the DBA is all about. It's just to them is already stated on document and in the document, and they just have to follow through the structure. And DBA is all about unseen examinations. They said it's all coursework, it's all seminar, it's all about critique and so on and so forth. So these are sharing with you what I've gained as an assessor over the years. Okay. We talk about DBA, so it is a single program or type of program. Actually, there is the American DBA program, which is among the earliest of all DBAs. I think the earliest one based on record started in 1922. It's a Harvard DBA, which still runs today. And American DBA is actually 4 practitioners. Very, very few non-practitioners actually join the program. Sometimes the entry requirement actually bars anyone who is not a practitioner. You should have quite a bit of experience in the organization at middle to senior levels before you can be eligible to join. There's also a public DBA and doctorate in public administration as well, also for practitioners. The whole idea is actually to provide advanced knowledge to practitioners, so that both the advanced research knowledge and advanced discipline knowledge can actually inform their practice better. Make them ask different types of questions that typically a practitioner would not ask, but an academician or theoretician might ask, so that they can reflect better on the practice. So it's very much an academic oriented program, but there is a structure which is a little bit different. It's coursework based for the student DBA. Then you have the European version. European Australian version started about the same time, 1990s, because there was a lot of complaint about PhD not being actually suitable and appropriate for non-academics. PhD is actually a training program for you to become an academic or lecturer. So people outside who are keen found this to be extremely narrow in terms of their career or professional interests. Hence this PhD for non-academics, and to differentiate it, we call it DBA. It was not meant to be too different, but because training one to be an academic, so there is some coursework. There are also many European DBAs which are fully research based, except that the research is turned away from the disciplinary core to the economic sector that actually uses the knowledge of business studies, but it doesn't as clearly differentiate in many areas. But UK is one place where this has been quite clearly differentiated now. Australian DBA started around the same time, 92, 93. The whole idea was let everybody be a doctor. Sounds familiar? Uh, like Asia, because there was a lot of MBAs who have graduated from the universities and different programs. And so there was a lot of interest in trying to exploit this market by giving them a doctoral program. So these are terms I use to describe what happened there. So these are not terms someone else has used. So let everybody be a doctor. Let every MBA be a doctor as well. So they came up with a doctoral program. And of course, Malaysia, which is what we are interested in. In Malaysia, we have what I call a confused doctor, because from the beginning, we didn't think through this carefully. We did not define it clearly. Some followed the Australian model, some followed the American model, some followed the European model. And early on, MQA and even LAN, the predecessor to MQA, did not really take control of and set this clearly. So it sort of evolved according to association. Some universities were Australian facing, so they had the Australian version. Some universities were European facing, so they had the European version. Some universities were American facing, so they created the American version. So you have a fairly confused state. And what does some MQA document say about DBA? DBA in Malaysia is not differentiated in terms of level. It is a level 8 qualification under the Malaysian qualification framework, and therefore it enjoys the same privilege of using the title doctor. The expected learning outcomes are the same, except there may be slight difference in purpose, what we call fit for purpose. The DBA is designed for a different audience, for a different purpose, but they are the same level, and all expectations of doctoral degrees apply to DBA as well. So at least in terms of the framework, does not distinguish or differentiate in terms of the extent of preparation or training. What it differentiates is in terms of the purpose of the training, and who would benefit from this. Industry practice versus the universities. So that is where the difference is. So that's the level 8, and the fitness for purpose is incorporated in the statements in MQF, Malaysian Qualification Framework. DBA and the Malaysian Qualification Framework, not necessarily in the framework, but in other documents, they recognize this as a professional doctorate. So professional doctorates are like a DBA, doctorate in education, the engineering doctorate. There is one called D Juris. We don't have it here, but Australia has it. These are all professional doctorates. Why professional doctorates? It's basically focused on professionals in a particular area of practice. Hence the word professional doctorate we use. In Malaysia, the professional doctorates, especially the DBA as we are talking today, they can be entirely dissertation based or thesis based, whichever you like, which means it's purely based on thesis or research. It can be mixed mode. You have some taught courses, and then there is a dissertation or research component, and it can be mainly a taught course with a very small research component. There are programs in the country where about 25% of the total assessment is on the dissertation. 75% is actually on the taught courses, and there's a comprehensive exam and so on and so forth. So DBA in terms of design can be from pure research to taught coursework, mainly taught courses. So you have this mix, and of course the privilege. DBAs are entitled to use the doctor title. And in the standards and the framework and many other places, there's no conditions imposed in terms of who could supervise and who could examine. This is left entirely to the institution to design. So there is no guidance from any one of the MQ documents. They say for DBA you should do this. No, it's left. The standards basically talk about the level 8 or doctoral qualifications, and this is left to the institutions to decide as is appropriate for the DBA. And this is where in many places they don't make the distinction, and it goes fairly, it becomes fairly confused, and sometimes I would use the word haywire. So within the institution, the good question to ask is, what is your program concept for DBA? What do you think of the DBA? Is it just PhD by coursework? Is it mixed mode? Does DBA has to include coursework, or it can be purely dissertation based? And what does it do for the practitioners? Is it specifically for practitioners? Can anyone else come and join? If you look at Malaysia, in most of the institutions, it is not exclusively for practitioners. There are also academics, fresh students who join this DBA. So it does not require that candidate must be a senior manager or senior practitioner in industry or an entrepreneur and things like that. So it's open-ended. So that makes the program even more confused, because if someone comes in with no experience, so what reflective practitioner are you talking about? What kind of practice knowledge he or she is bringing to the program? So it becomes very confused. And I think oftentimes this is done simply because of enrollment issues. You want the numbers, which complicates, and these issues of should DBA be a taught program? Can it be entirely a research program? And if it is entirely a research program, can it be different from the PhD? Okay, and if you look at Australia, they think of DBA as advanced studies for MBA. It's just advanced MBA. That's why in Australia, if DBA there's a coursework, and if you've done an MBA, they exempt you from the coursework. You straight go and do the dissertation. But if you do not have an MBA, you have an MA or some other masters, you need to do the coursework. And often the coursework is actually joined together with an MBA students, which becomes quite confusing to anyone looking at how come there is master's level courses residing within a doctoral level program. But Australia has that practice. They think of the coursework as the same as MBA. This is the different concept of MBA in the country, right? USM thinks of it as a consultant model. This is a training provided for someone to become a consultant. USM also has a choice. You can opt for a training, not consulting assignment, but you can opt for a training program where you design, deliver, and assess and do this thing. So USM has this option: consultant and a trainer model. UUM, if I'm not mistaken, has this entrepreneur and a consultant model. You need to have this component as part of your DBA training. Then you have the DBA model, which is a manager model. It is designed to try and enhance your managerial capabilities in terms of marketing, in terms of people management, in terms of strategic management, in terms of financial management. So the focus is to become a manager rather than a consultant, right? Of course, a good manager can also be a consultant, but the focus is largely developing the manager so that he can manage better. Then you have also the business research model. These are the DBAs where he's 100% researcher, except that they say the research has to be an applied research addressing a real business challenge or problem. So that model is like a PhD, except now you are doing research based on real problems faced by the businesses. So it's in terms of choice of topics, types of questions you're going to ask. So you have that, and certainly the advanced study model. So in terms of the program concept, what I'm driving ahead here is, what do you have in mind your particular DBA program is? So DBA is not a monolithic one-dimensional program. There are so many variations within DBA. So within this spectrum, where do you fall? Where does your particular program fall? And that's quite important. So it's not a question of always between DBA and PhD. There are variations of DBA. So within DBA, where do you fall? And that's also quite important, so that you are clear. DBA cannot do everything for everybody. So what's your unique, what's your proposition? What's the value? What's the design principles that underpin your particular DBA? So there are choices to be made, and we can see these products in the market, the different packages in the market. In some cases, the universities are conscious of that particular design. They actually wanted it and they designed it, and they sort of, in some cases, it was not designed explicitly with clear forethought, but it was something that they evolved into over time, because the type of students are coming in, what was popular, what was the demand, and so that sort of evolved into something. But either way, you find that there are variations in the marketplace. What about teaching? Who can teach? How should we teach? Who should or can teach the DBA courses? It's a big question in the universities when we assess them and ask them, do you have any specific criteria for those who are teaching in this program, especially where there's a coursework? Generally, the requirement is that the person has a doctoral degree. And in most cases, many of them are actually PhDs. And most of these PhDs are actually people who went through a pure research PhD. Okay, and they are the ones who are actually handling the taught courses within the program, which is one of the big challenges in DBA, because a pure research-based PhD does not do any coursework. If at all they do any courses, it is actually to support the research. So they might do research method, they might learn a particular package and things like that. But that is to support their research. It is not to dive deeply into the discipline knowledge. That is all established and demonstrated through the research that they're doing, which is always very, very narrow, right? PhD in business does not actually do a PhD in business. He does a PhD in a particular area of business and a particular issue in business. So often when we say a PhD in business, we actually affording him a lot more expertise than he actually has in terms of the research that he has carried out. The rest of the knowledge comes from things that he has done prior to the PhD. So who should teach? Who can teach DBA? Ideally is someone who has both academic and industry exposure or experience. If your DBA is intended to be a professional doctorate for the practitioners, very much industry focused, then you have to have someone who is either extensively exposed to or has extensive experience in the industry, besides having a doctoral degree. It could be a PhD, could be a DBA, but has a doctor, so that he by experience has these two worlds to tap and adjust. If he is purely from the academic discipline and doesn't have any industry experience, he or she is going to drag this program towards a disciplinary type PhD. It's not going to be very practitioner oriented because PhD by training privileges the discipline, the knowledge in the discipline. It doesn't privilege the practice. So he or she will drag the thing to the comfort zone. Comfort zone is, okay, let's talk about knowledge mastery within the discipline and not in terms of the actual practice of it, right? So Ideally, we should, but in most cases, we don't have that ideal. Okay, in some cases, there are people um, who had some experience before and then they did a PhD, which is okay. But hopefully, they have got more current experience, so they can actually bring this into the taught courses. What is the objective in teaching in the taught courses? What exactly do you do in a doctoral level course, right? There are courses in many areas. So do you teach the basics? Do you go into theories? Do you go into models? Do you deal with paradigms? So what exactly is the level at which you conduct these courses? I will tell you an example of DBA where the textbook I saw is actually an introduction into corporate finance in a DBA finance module. That is a definite giveaway. You are teaching what basic fundamentals, building blocks of finance in a DBA program, and maybe the reason is those in the DBA program have actually no financial background at all. They may not have any business, they may not have an MBA, or might not have the MBA, might not have led them into finance areas, or they do not have finance experience at all. So actually you're starting from trying to understand the basics of corporate finance. What is internal rate of return, what is ROI, and things like that. That's very scary. So what level should you teach? Okay, so in most cases, we are talking about not actually teaching them, but actually conducting seminars where they have to rapidly and critically read materials that actually exposes them to the changes and the challenges that are taking place in that particular area. So we're not talking about building blocks, and not even talking about functional theories. We're talking about issues where both theory and practice actually meets, or if you like, collide, where they can actually try and navigate and see how does the theory affects the profession, and how does the profession affect the theory, and how can each enrich either the theory enriches the profession, or the profession enriches the theory. So that's the focus, should be the objective in the classroom. But it doesn't happen all the time. Some of the time is actually teaching basically MBA stuff again. It's like a first degree of some type going into an MBA program and is being taught some of the basics. So that's what is being happening, and not pitched at the level where you are dealing with more critical understanding of both the knowledge and also the application of the knowledge. What expectations do candidates have about DBA when they come into DBA? Very varied. Consultants who are in the DBA program look at DBA program and the coursework as where the lecturers will can come and tell them what's the answer to what's the solution to the problem. They are expecting someone who can give them answers. Unfortunately, that kind of mindset. This is secondary school, where the teacher knows most, and the students actually coming with very minimal experience into the classroom. So they will teach you, they will tell you, they will inform you, and they have all the answers, so to speak. In the DBA program, that should not be the expectation, but in my interaction with DBA students, the number of times they've actually, when you ask them, what do you expect from your lecturer in this classroom? Or you should be able to talk about what's the solution to these problems, these business problems. So this is coming from the student side. There's also an issue with what the students are expecting from the DBA program. They're expecting answers and solutions. DBA programs shouldn't be giving answers and solutions. DBA program should be one that actually exposes the students to different approaches and different systems, different ways of thinking, different mindsets, different mental models in seeking solutions. Everyone can seek the different solutions. So they need to be exposed to this, that there are different approaches, mindset systems, paradigms to think about these problems, and each one might lead you in a different direction. None of this is actually right or wrong or better than the other. They all can be good solutions, right? So there is a problem there. Can PhDs teach courses? You have to be very careful because many PhDs are research-based only. They have never gone through a doctoral coursework. So suddenly when you ask them to teach, they have no concept of a doctoral coursework. So PhDs can teach, but I think you need to assemble them in a workshop and guide them and monitor them and help them. So, but in most cases, we have too much faith in the PhD, and they say, oh, and let the person into the classroom and do whatever they have in mind. So if they're not gone through a coursework, they have very little concept of what you do at a doctoral level, and they might do what they think is right, and what they think is right may be grossly wrong. And that one is actually a program management issue. So if you're going to bring someone who has never had this kind of experience, you need to actually have these people go through a process with you, either individually or in groups, so that everybody is on the same page, everybody understands. And if they are unable to understand or they are in disagreement, then you would want to take them out of the class, take them out of this kind of teaching, because they're not actually, they're capable, they're certainly qualified, but they do not have the same understanding of what needs to be done in the classroom. And I use the word ambidextrous academic. These people teaching this must be able to swim in two oceans. This is the academic, which is very much focused on the discipline, the field, and then the practice of that particular discipline out there. And these two very often do not really seamlessly come together. They collide. There's a lot of tension in between. So this academic who is handling this DBA program need to be one who is able to navigate between these two tension-filled spheres, so that he's able to open up the discussion for the students to in terms of how each of these can actually, instead of colliding and creating tension, each of these can actually come and be a tremendous help for the practice, and how the practice can be a very strong input in terms of improving theory. And the last one, DBA classes are always collaborative and peer sessions. It's never meant to be a monologue or teacher-centered or teaching kind of a session, right? So it has to be a lot of collaboration between the students. DBA is all about professional knowledge. So how should that be assessed? Examinations, what type of assessments are appropriate, and how can we see, how can we test and be sure that they're able to theorize professional practice and knowledge. And so this often is not just for them to explain what they do and why they do, but also to see if can you abstract from this theoretical, the professional knowledge for purposes of deriving what we can call professional knowledge. Professional knowledge is not just a bunch of SOPs and procedures and processes. It has to be abstracted from that. So what do you do in profession, and how can you theorize this professional practice, something that is applicable to a broader set of settings. So practitioners also need to understand how the theory works. And but every practitioner has his own model and a theory of business success, of successfully managing projects and people and things like that. So in this DBA, you actually want to sensitize them and also train them to think about, okay, you have this, how can you abstract from this? This is just for one particular setting or one particular organization. How can I abstract this in such a way that it can actually be useful for the entire industry? And what part of this is actually specifically situated in your practice and cannot be removed? If you remove it, doesn't work. What part of this can go? And this is where practitioners don't really, they're not really good at it. They think that what works in their job, in the industry right now is the golden rule that applies to everyone. So you will have Tony Fernandez talking about his approach as though it's a golden approach to everyone in the world. It is not, okay? You cannot take a procedure and turn it into a golden rule for everyone to follow. There is always some things that are contextual and cannot be removed. It will not work elsewhere, but some things can be abstracted and maybe a lesson to learn, but it's not always explicit. It is very much implicit in the practice, and that's a part of becoming a reflective practitioner. You can abstract and extract and provide for yourself and also for others in terms of enriching professional practice. So that is where you want to get your DBA students to. DBA dissertation. If you look at the literature, they will tell you, all the brochures will tell you it's applied focus. It's dealing with which is industry relevant. It should be theory aware. It's you should not just do literature review of the discipline, but you also need to do practice reviews. Yes, all of this is what DBA is all about. But when you say applied focus, do you find DBA dissertations that are very much theoretical and discipline oriented? Yes. You can hardly differentiate the thesis from PhD thesis. And are they all relating to something that is relevant immediately to the industry or resonates with industry? Not necessarily. Some of this are also conceptual, theoretical stuff as well. And one area that DBA doesn't do enough is actually action research. Action research is actually really applied research. Otherwise, it becomes just research. So when you say a research is applied focus, it is still a research. It has no application is not part of that research. It is post research. It has implication for application. It can be useful for application, but it's not action. So action research is actually very appropriate for DBA, but unfortunately, it is actually not that common in DBA programs, partly because many of those who are in the program are themselves not familiar with or keen to do action research. But action research would actually really make DBA very applied and very oriented towards a practitioner, if you like, and able to bring theory really into the practice and practice into theory. But unfortunately, it is not there. And today, DBAs are also hung up on structural equation modeling, your PLS and PLS warp and what have you. And the business world is actually very much simple in terms of analytical rigor. But you're getting away from that in terms of and the last one, okay, when you're framing your research and things like that, you are looking at what are the business priorities, not priorities within the discipline. Usually the priorities within the discipline are priorities identified by academics through their writings. Although some of the academics have got a lot of consulting industry experience, but these are actually vicarious. They're not directly involved, but they look at and advise others who are directly involved. So they have very different priorities. Some of the issues, the burning issues in the literature, is not necessarily burning issues in practice. So my session will be for DBA facilitators and supervisors. The DBA managers need to really clearly articulate what's your concept to all those in the program, supervisors, those who are teaching, with no exception. You cannot operate from the basis that everybody knows, everybody understands these things, and not by just giving them a 2 or 3 page paper and say, okay, go back and read. In all likelihood, it won't get read. So it is to be done in live sessions where you get together and you talk about it, and you want to make sure everybody clearly understands what concept of this is. Is there a consultant model? Is there a trainer model? Is there a manager model? Is there an entrepreneur model? What's the model that we are using as the concept behind our program? That needs to be actually done and redone because you got new people coming in, things like that. If you want to keep the concept true to the concept, then you have to do this. This is something you will learn, or I learn in service management. If you want to develop a service concept is important. And in order to make sure the service concept is delivered the way it was intended or imagined, then you've got everyone to be very clear about what the concept is. It cannot be just clear in one person's head. It has to be clear in everyone who's involved in the process. Especially those PhDs, I've mentioned it a number of times, if they have not done coursework, pure research, things like that, you have to put them through some form of mentoring to make sure they're able to deliver the taught part of the course quite well. This assumption that somehow they are qualified and therefore they should know what they have to do in the course is actually a very dangerous assumption, and usually does not turn out very well. And unfortunately, the students will be the victim on the receiving end in terms of whatever concept this person carries into the teaching. And eventually, of course, if you have a good mix of academics and practitioners with doctorates, that is a good way to approach the teaching, the group that is going to teach and guide this. I have some strong words, and if anyone in the DBA program or thinks that theory is useless for practice, ban him from the program. Because practice is so full of theories, much more than the academic world. They have theories on everything, sometimes very simplistic theories, sometimes very dangerous theories, sometimes these theories are downright racial, and so on and so forth. But these are not articulated, they are not defended, they're not spoken, but they are nevertheless very strong theories used for decision making, and it guides their behavior every day. So there's a lot of theory. So if someone thinks that theory doesn't belong to DBA, doesn't belong to this kind of program, stop them from teaching the program. Don't let them inside until you have able to convert them. Okay. So discuss this among yourself every semester, every year. They should work out to discuss how are we doing, how are we teaching at the right level, is our approach okay, and how are the students responding to the level, and what should we do, both on the teacher side, supervisor side, and also on the on the student side. Okay, and define as much as possible and as clearly as possible what everyone needs to do. We always assume too much about the intuitive understanding of everyone, students, supervisors, and those facilitators. And then we say, we give you a syllabus and we give you some documents, and here you go, and more often than not, they all go and different things, and it doesn't become a coherent program. It is just a program with a hodgepodge of coursework that they do and earn credits and complete. And communication is important. I won't dwell too much on this. All of them need to be communicated, what exactly you're doing and how you're doing, what you're expecting, what you will deliver, what you will not deliver, what this program is not about and should not be coming, also need to be told very clearly. And I think this is what everybody was in the beginning. PhD and DBA has to have the same rigor. At least in most countries, the qualification framework treat them as doctoral programs. They have the same rigor. The student need to have equal knowledge of the field, and should be equally trained and adept at in terms of the research, not only method, but also methodologies. But the programs have different purpose. The difference in purpose should not make them of different standard or different rigor, right? The purpose is different. DBA should be coursework. At least there's some degree of coursework. If it is purely research based, I'm afraid eventually the research will be no different from the PhD research. Because at the research level, those who are supervising, those who are mediating this defense proposal and all the process, they're largely PhD, so they tend to skew this towards a PhD type research. So unless there's a coursework, which can to some extent try and establish the program concept in terms of, theorizing the profession and professionalizing the theory, it will not happen. And in terms of the difference of DBA, it has to have and should have very clear applied business theory. It's not just applied business practice, it's applied business theory. Theory should not be taken out of the picture. I know many practitioners don't like the word theory, but that doesn't mean that should be actually removed. So it should be applied business theory. Professional practice is actually rich in applied business theory. And those theories need to be actually made explicit. So DBA research can actually make these theories explicit. DBA should be more capability focused. PhDs tend to be very narrow. Their capability development is very narrow. It's largely in terms of research capabilities and also mastery of discipline and communication capabilities. You're able to write and defend. You're able to come up with an independent research which is able to break new grounds and so on and so forth. So the range of capabilities is actually much more narrower. For DBA, if it is practitioner oriented, it has to be much broader. It's not only about doing research. It's not only about having knowledge in the field. It is also applying that knowledge in a particular context for very clear purpose, the business purpose here. And that always requires strong soft skills. Okay, without soft skills, that's why many PhDs, unless they've acquired soft skills earlier, they would be actually miserable in a business environment, but they'll be perfectly okay in the lab or in a research setting. But in an organizational context, they will be very miserable, because in organizational context, you have to have the soft skills to really turn your knowledge and capabilities into outcomes. In the research setting, it can be very much individual, if you like, or it's a small group of similar thinking, similarly trained people. So if you don't communicate that well in a research grouping, it's not terribly harmful. Probably everyone has the same kinds of issues in that grouping. So capabilities in a DBA, and finally, it has to have business relevance. And business relevance often means not just generally, but specifically to your country or your setting or your industry. What are some of the issues, and how can this research can really raise the bar understanding for policy making at institutional level, and also at the public authority level in terms of managing or regulating businesses. It should be at that level, and then you can see the difference in the DBA. So in terms of the level, it is the same level. It has to have the same rigor. It is for different purpose, for different types of students, and it has different structure, and it provides a broader set of capabilities than a PhD would. And certainly it has to have very applied business focus. So I think I'm at the end of my session.